Welcome to Expert Views on ADR EVA, a podcast about simplifying the traditional African method of settling disputes or the appropriate dispute resolution ADR in a bid to attract more users to settle their disputes or conflicts with early dispute resolution, ombuds, arbitration, mediation, collaborative law, restorative justice, negotiation, conciliation, and of course, early trial evaluation. My name is DrChinweEgbunike, the Marketing Liaison of Ombuds Day 2024 American Bar Association Dispute Resolution and the host of Expert Views on ADR EVA video podcast. I'm delighted to welcome Megan Willoughby to the EVA show. She is serving as the Ombudsperson for Villanova University. Meg is currently the co-chair of the Ombuds Committee in the dispute resolution section of the American Bar Association. She is an attorney and served as a subject matter expert in the Office for Civil Rights, U.S. Department of Education. She wears many hats, so I've left the link to her profile. Welcome to the show, Meg.
Thank you, Chinwe. It's so great to be here with you.
It's such an honor having you. So without further ado, the first question is, what is Ombuds and the history associated with it?
Sure. It's a great question and one that has many answers. So I'll try and give you my perspective of it. I say for shorthand, I'm a conflict coach. And what I mean by that is I'm someone who's available to individuals in my workplace to help them confidentially explore conflicts that they're having, to discuss options, and to elevate systemic concerns. Now, there's many different types of ombuds, and I'd like to begin by just going over the type that I am is called an organizational ombuds, and that is the it can be a public or private ombuds with the either internally or externally facing, and the actions that is generally involving the entity or its actors. So for instance, I work, as you mentioned, in Villanova University. So my constituency is in higher education. And the goal is to manage internal conflicts for organizational ombuds. There are also two other main types of ombuds. They're the classical ombuds, and these are generally public sector employees. And they can also be internal or external facing. And their role, I like to think of them as looking at the actions by the government. So you might think of like a city ombudsperson, and their goal is fair treatment for the public. And lastly, there's an advocate model, which is, again, it can be public or private, and they have a different role in that they advocate on behalf of an aggrieved constituency. So think of nursing home or some vulnerable population, and their goal is to protect individual rights and interests.
Oh, okay. Thank you so very much. So is there a history behind it?
Yes. Ombuds began in, we like to think of it as the beginning in Sweden, but technically it began in Turkey. So in the 1700s, King Charles XII of Sweden flees to Turkey after being defeated by Russia, and he's concerned about maintaining authority over his kingdom. He sees a model there in the Turkish office that ensures that officials are following Islamic law. He loves that idea because he's looking to rule from afar, and he appoints a Chancellor of Justice in Sweden in 1713. It stayed in effect in Sweden for the next 100 years or so in different variations, and then it was codified in Sweden's constitution in 1809. And that concept was really applied to keep a strong parliament in check. And that continued in Sweden for another 100 plus years until it was adopted by Scandinavian countries in the early 1900s to mid 1900s. Then it began its global expansion, as most things did in that time period. And we see come to the United States through, I'm in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Our very own University of Pennsylvania brought it here through a Penn Law professor, Kenneth Culp Davis. He traveled the world for a whole year looking for new ideas to solve problems about administrative processes. He found this idea in the Scandinavian countries, wrote a law article about it in 1961 called Ombudsman in the US, Officers to Criticize Administrative Action. And from there, it took off. It was something that he also, like us, Chinwe, was involved in the ABA, and he obtained passage of a 1969 resolution encouraging state and local ombuds. And it became an idea that was adapted at that time in higher ed to resolve issues involving unrest, civil unrest at colleges and universities. So in Martin Luther King's time, they adopted this classical model that was brought over to help find solutions, creative solutions for these problems that were unprecedented and so difficult and stay with us today. In fact, at Villanova, we have a freedom school modeled after Martin Luther King's leadership, and we teach conflict management to the community. And it's something that I speak about having the ombuds role having its roots in colleges in Martin Luther King's time, which is really powerful and meaningful to me. And it expanded in corporate field in 1980s or so in response to crises there, and has really taken off in the US and is at most large institutions and in many governments and vulnerable populations to serve that role of an intermediary.
Oh, okay. Thank you so very much. So you mentioned resolution adopted, and that reminds me that the ABA House of Delegates recently adopted the Resolution 500, which you were one of the pioneers or something. Can you tell us more about it?
Well, I'm so glad you brought it up because I'm really excited about Resolution 500. It is such an important resolution for our field of early dispute resolution, Chinwe. It shows the House of Delegates and our Board of Governors leadership in encouraging the use of early dispute resolution to resolve conflict. And ombuds being one very critical component of that, and specifically named in that resolution as a method for conflict resolution, much like negotiation or mediation. And it is centered through the ABA's resolution as a way to resolve disputes in a cost-effective and time-efficient manner, which are two things that everyone wants, right? I mean, we had 600 House of Delegates unanimously approve this resolution and adopt it because that makes sense to everyone. Those are two things we all want for conflict resolution. But in addition, the report, which is really fantastic and lays out the arguments for this resolution, it talks about other benefits like party self-determination, the importance of deciding for yourself how you want to resolve your dispute rather than having control of that dispute in the hands of someone else. The benefits of making informed decisions, preserving relationships, finding creative solutions, and the increased availability of judicial resources, because it's really freeing up the dockets for those cases that deserve and need to be decided by judges. So we had fantastic support from the House of Delegates, only because it was such a resolution that makes sense to everyone, and it was supported by all of the sections of the UBA, and we had co-sponsors. It was led by the EDR, the Early Dispute Resolution Committee, and the co-chairs there, Felicia Harris-Hoff and Ellie Villandre, and the other principal author besides myself, Mary Cullen, former co-chair and now council member. So we brought several different perspectives to the resolution, but what we really relied on was the guidance of all the leaders of the dispute resolution section, like Anna Sumbold, James Alfini, our House of Delegate representative, along with David Larson, and just all of the leaders who share their guidance and their expertise with us to develop over several years this really profound and meaningful resolution.
Yeah, that's a welcome development, very timely as well. So,
Yes, well, you may have seen also some of the prior resolutions.
yeah.
We have the 2017 resolution,
Mm.
which encourages the use of ombuds to prevent and manage and
Yeah.
resolve conflicts. The 2004 resolution, which really features the standards of practice. And the original 1969, not to forget the 2001 resolution, which centers ombuds as a role to resolve complaints. But the 1969 resolution, as we began talking about that, Kenneth Culp Davis starting the initiative to formalize the importance of formalizing the ombuds role really has had such impact for our profession.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Oh, thank you so very much, Meg. So that is the question. Okay, this raises a prevalent question. So the role of the ombuds or the ombudsman, how does it differ from that of a mediator or arbitrator?
So very different from an arbitrator, because an arbitrator is making a decision, right? Sometimes appealable, but it is a decision maker, where an ombuds is guiding, persuading, negotiating, much like a mediator. And oftentimes, I like to think of the way that an ombuds can help being on a spectrum, and everything from being a sounding board for an individual with an issue all the way up through mediation. So those same skills apply and are useful for the ombuds field. Now, when we talk about the role of mediation, I like to point out how the ombuds role is different from mediation, though, in that it centers itself on confidentiality, right? So what's very different for an ombuds than anyone else, really, that someone might bring a concern to, is that it ensures confidentiality for we call them visitors, people who come and seek the services of ombuds. And we are able to keep confidential, not just what is talked about, but the fact that we even met. So that, and there's many ways that we do that, like having private offices, and ensuring that we're able to maintain total confidentiality for the visitor, so that they are relieved of the burden of wondering what happens if this information is shared outside. Now, the only way that ombuds share information is if two things are told to us: either one, imminent harm, so someone says that they intend to harm themselves or others, or if there's abuse or neglect of children that is communicated. Those are clear exceptions, and that's generally governed by state law here in the States. But otherwise, the only way that we share information is if we're explicitly authorized to. So I like to think of the relationship between an ombuds and a visitor as one of being the visitor being the driver and the ombuds being the passenger. So the driver controls the ride, and so the visitor directs anything that the ombuds might do. But it is and that relates to that confidentiality piece. So that might be authorized to intervene in some way, all the way up through mediation, but that's at the discretion of the visitor. And that's something we would talk about and explore, those options and the risks and rewards of proceeding in that way or another.
Okay, so one would argue that the role of an ombudsman, especially the organizational type, that the ombuds role is not, they are not independent in the sense that they are hired by the school, and of course the sort of allegiance should come first to the school than to the students or their colleagues or whoever they are settling disputes for. So what do you make of that? What do you think? What is your opinion on that?
I understand that sort of knee-jerk reaction that
Yeah.
someone might have, but I think it's important to take that in the perspective of knowing that the role of an ombuds is governed by standards of practice, particularly the organizational ombuds. We have our own standards of practice, but the resolution that the ABA passed about the 2004 resolution states clearly what the standards are for practicing ombuds. So if one were to not practice in an independent way, which is another hallmark of a effective and successful ombuds, then they would not be practicing as an ombuds. They would be not living up to the standards of the profession. So it is essential that ombuds act with complete independence. And there are many ways that ombuds and the institutions that they work within can structure the role so that it maintains independence. And that's essential and that non-negotiable. And so I think that's really useful for people to think about, that there's no way an ombuds could be an ombuds if they're not being independent. And there are always ways that that individuals who feel that someone's not being independent in that role can report up, right? There's ethics point, for instance, in many organizations, or other anonymous ways to flag that an ombuds is not acting appropriately in someone's perspective, and that can be investigated.
Oh, okay, thank you. So when it comes to time and costs, in the sense of settling disputes via ombuds when compared to litigation, which is cheaper, and is ombuds more time effective than litigation?
Resoundingly, yes. It is so much more time efficient and effective. I would direct you to my public report for Villanova. Most ombuds issue some sort of annual report, and it for me, I can quantify how long it takes for me to resolve a matter. And in this past year, over 50% of the visitors who came to me, their cases were resolved within 90 days. Another quarter were resolved within 180 days. So within half a year, people are seeing a resolution to their concern. Compare that to, I came from private practice and also the federal government, where it was typical for cases to be with us for months, years, decades even. So that is a stark difference. And I would add, and this is also in the report for Resolution 500, the effect of COVID-19 on backlogs in the in federal courts really exacerbates that situation, and it also happens in state courts as well. There was a 60% increase in backlogs in the federal government between 2019 and 2020, and another 11% between 2020 and 2021. And that's due to increased filings and also reduction of removal of federal cases. So when you're comparing the time that a matter might take, it's just, there is no comparison. And also when you talk about the costs, one of the things that many ombuds do, and I do in my role at Villanova, is I ask visitors to provide me information at the conclusion of the academic year about what they were planning to do prior to consulting with the ombuds, and then what they actually did afterwards. And there's a significant reduction in the number of formal filings or decisions that they're going to make affecting their job, such as leaving it, that they took after consulting with the ombuds. So going to quit, going to file a formal complaint, going to file litigation before, and then after not doing it. So if you look at the value of an ombuds, you can measure it in those ways. But also, in addition to cost and time, I would add stress, right? The stress that comes with formal filings is monumental. And the stress that comes with resolving a problem and coming up with a creative solution that allows you to repair a relationship, understand your workplace better, focus on your work instead of the distraction of the concern that brought you to the ombuds, that's also immeasurable.
Oh, thank you. I think you've touched on the advantages of ombuds. Can you sort of expand on the disadvantages as well? Is there any disadvantages?
You won't hear any disadvantages from me. I am a true believer in the ombuds role. I will tell you what some people say is a disadvantage, and then I'll tell you why it's not one. Some would say ombuds, they have no authority. They can't make a decision, right? And that's true. We don't have authority. And that's why it's so powerful, because people know we're not making the decision. They're making the decision. The visitor is making the decision. And the visitor can decide to go to a decision maker, go through a formal channel, but having the option of an informal channel where there isn't a decision, there isn't a decider, it just alleviates that relinquishment of control, right? They're able to make that decision themselves and maintain control. So no negatives.
No negatives. Okay. Any more advantages that you've not mentioned?
Oh, it's wonderful. I haven't even talked about the early warning system that it's able to provide. I mean, one of the great advantages, Chinwe, is that these individual problems, whether they be brought by a group, brought by an individual, whether they affect one person or a number, they're resolved in a triage fashion. I like to think of it as we dissect that issue, we resolve it, and the person's able to move on. But that gem, that information about the concern, I am able to elevate to leaders who are interested in hearing it. And you wouldn't have an ombuds in your organization or your in your government or in your population if you weren't interested in hearing what's going on the ground. So by default, if you have an ombuds office, you have a visionary leadership that wants to hear from the ombuds, and they want that because it's good for the organization, it's good for the entity. They're able to hear this advanced message about what's happening and how they might improve it. So one thing that ombuds are great at is seeing across an institution, taking information that they've learned from a visitor and completely extracted from the situation itself or the anything identifiable about it, and communicate that to people who are able to make an improvement, whether it be a policy, a practice, information that they didn't know. Right, these large institutions sometimes are weighted down by the bureaucracy that serves them so well in a multitude of ways, but sometimes it creates friction when they don't understand some unintended consequences. So ombuds are able to point that out, help them get a jump start on that issue and resolve it so that it's not affecting others. It's really a fantastic benefit that ombuds bring to organizations and the constituencies that they serve. And one way that we do it is we put that information in our reports. The International Ombuds Association has developed these categories of reporting concerns, and we use those to delineate what kind of information what we're seeing and what kind of concerns we're seeing. And by putting it in these categories and subcategories, so some of the categories have 19 subcategories, so we're able to be very specific and show that there's a magnitude of concern, for instance, in a particular area, and use that to start a conversation with leaders who have responsibility for that area and talk about ways that there might be improvements.
Oh, okay. Thank you so very much. So what are the training and requirements for one to become an ombuds or an ombudsman? Yeah.
What's terrific about the role is that you can bring so many different areas of expertise to it. Right? There's not one pathway that you need to follow in order to become an ombuds. Many ombuds have different educational backgrounds. Like some have Juris Doctors, like I do.
Yeah.
I also have a master's in public policy and politics, which really helps me understand organizations and how they are structured.
Yeah.
Many have psychology or social work backgrounds. And all of these skills and expertise that we bring to the field, along with our conflict resolution skills, it really help inform our relationships with both institutions and the visitors that come to see us, and help us do our jobs better. It also there are also conflict resolution degrees, and we've had folks from Canada to our Ombuds Committee meetings speak about different degrees that are available there, and there are some in the States as well. Also, our International Ombuds Association has a certification program, the co-op program, which is an additional level of certification that one could obtain in order to show mastery of these concepts. But I would say the most important training that one could have for becoming an ombuds is to have excellent judgment and character. Those are, again, non-negotiable. You need these things to be excellent at your job, and every ombuds that I've met has them.
Oh, awesome. Thank you for sharing that on the show. So what is the way forward for the mass advocacy of ADR?
Well, I think podcasts like yours, where we're educating the public about what it is that, what it looks like to be an early dispute resolution practitioner, resolutions like 500 and the ABA, showing the public the benefits of this field, and talking about the ways that it can help resolve disputes. And those, I think, are gaining in popularity. If you look at the timeline of the last 75 years and how this field has grown exponentially, both internationally and here in the States, if you, from the American view, it really makes me sure that we're going to see vast use of early dispute resolution and alternative dispute resolution in the future. I mean, there's no option, right? The backlog in the courts, the way that ADR has not necessarily lived up to, as we talk about in the resolution report, it hasn't really lived up to the promise, and this focus on early dispute resolution, getting in there, being preventative, managing conflict, and resolving it and getting past it. That's the wave of the future, and that's something that ombuds can offer as practitioners and as educators. And so I really appreciate your being at the forefront of this field and sharing out this information the way you are.
Thank you so very much. So we're running out of time. One final question is, how can members of the public that would want to join our Ombuds committee, how can they join us?
Yes, well, they just need to become members of the ABA, the American Bar Association. So terrific organization with a lot of benefits, from discounts on car rentals, I understand, to free CLEs for lawyers, which is a great benefit for those of us that practice, along with lots of programming that about current topics. I just attended programming about better ways to run meetings, the use of AI. I mean, we have cutting edge topics with great practitioners that offer all sorts of information that we need for our everyday work. I would also say that joining the committees in the ABA allows you to network with other interested and involved practitioners and aspiring practitioners. So being a member of a committee allows you to engage like you are in our Ombuds Committee, serving as our liaison to the section for Ombuds Day, which is really just such a key feature of the Ombuds Committee. We love our Ombuds Day. At the ABA here, we organize a national theme along with all the other really effective and contributing ombuds associations out there, like COFO and IOA and so many others in Doha. So we really join all the ombuds organizations together to create what will be the theme for the year. And then they go out and they have their own programming, and we feature each other's work, and we get proclamations here in the States from city and state governments about recognizing Ombuds Day. It's really just a fantastic recognition of the impact of our field. So we hope that people go to our website, Ombuds Day, to learn more about the history of the Ombuds field and the work of the Ombuds Committee. And we're so glad to have new members join us, and there's free programming for folks that aren't members yet. So you can come to join some of our programming and see for yourself what it is that I'm talking about here. But I know they'll love it and learn and become addicted to getting involved with the ABA and the dispute resolution section.
Oh, thank you so very much, Meg, for everything, for your insights, your perspectives, and the learning you shared with us. I believe that potential users would embrace all you have stated herein, and of course opt for ombuds whenever the need arises. Thank you so very much for coming on the show. And of course, this is a master class. I don't even want it to end, but I mean, we have to go, easy. So.
I guess we have to go eat dinner.
All right.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much, Chinwe.
Yes.
I really appreciate the opportunity.
No worries. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.